Welcome back to our channel USA's Dark Secrets. If you are here for raw, real stories of betrayal and hard choices, stay with us and don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started. The soft glow of Christmas lights flickered across the room, casting shadows that danced along the walls. The warm aroma of pine needles blended with the faint scent of cinnamon cookies, wafting through the air. It was the kind of morning that seemed to promise joy and peace, a holiday postcard come to life. But within this idyllic setting, something darker was brewing, unseen by anyone but the man sitting quietly on the couch. Michael sat there, his hands clasped tightly, his expression unreadable. Across from him, Sarah laughed softly, her radiant smile lighting up the room as she cradled their infant son. Her joy was palpable, her love for Christmas unshakable, but Michael's mind was elsewhere, far removed from the festivities. For weeks, Michael had been living with a secret that gnawed at his soul. It had started innocently enough, with a nagging feeling he couldn't shake. A scribbled note tucked carelessly into a drawer, a name he didn't recognize, had planted the seed of doubt. At first, he had dismissed it. After all, Sarah had never given him any reason to doubt her. They had built a life together, a marriage filled with love and trust. But then came the little things. Stories that didn't quite add up, unexplained absences, and an unfamiliar tension in Sarah's demeanor. Michael tried to push it aside, convincing himself that he was overthinking. But doubt is a parasite. Once it finds a host, it grows. Unable to silence the whispers of suspicion in his mind, Michael made a decision he never thought he'd have to make. One afternoon, while Sarah was out running errands, he took a DNA sample from the baby and sent it off for testing. Even as he sealed the envelope, guilt weighed heavily on him. It felt like a betrayal of the woman he loved, but the need for answers outweighed the shame. Days turned into weeks, and the results finally arrived just 2 days before Christmas. His hands trembled as he tore open the envelope, the weight of his fears pressing down on him. As his eyes scanned the paper, the world around him seemed to blur. Probability of paternity, 0%. The words echoed in his mind, each one a dagger to his heart. He read the results again, hoping against hope that he had misunderstood, but there was no mistake. The child he had lovingly called his son was not biologically his. Michael's world shattered in an instant. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, they all surged through him, threatening to overwhelm. He wanted to confront Sarah immediately, to demand answers, but he stopped himself. This wasn't a conversation to have in the heat of the moment. He needed time to process, to decide how to handle the truth. Christmas morning arrived, and Michael's resolve was firm. He would confront her, but he would do it his way. He watched Sarah as she cheerfully passed out gifts, her laughter filling the room. She seemed so genuine, so full of love, and for a fleeting moment, Michael questioned everything. Could he be wrong? Was there some explanation that could make this all go away? But the paper in his pocket was a stark reminder of the truth he couldn't ignore. The final gift lay under the tree, a small box wrapped in elegant paper and topped with a silver bow. Sarah's eyes lit up when Michael handed it to her, her curiosity piqued. "What's this?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. "Open it and see," Michael replied, his tone calm, almost detached. Sarah unwrapped the box slowly, savoring the moment. Inside, she found a folded piece of paper. Her brows furrowed as she unfolded it, her smile fading as her eyes scanned the text. Confusion turned to shock, then to horror. "Michael, what is this?" she stammered, her voice trembling. Michael leaned back, his expression unreadable. "It's a DNA test," he said evenly. "And divorce papers. Merry Christmas, Sarah." The room fell silent, the cheerful crackle of the fireplace now a cruel contrast to the tension hanging in the air. Sarah's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she clutched the papers. "Michael, please, let me explain," she began, but Michael cut her off, his voice rising with the anger he had been suppressing. "Explain what? Explain how you lied to me? How you let me believe I was his father? How you destroyed everything we built?" Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she tried to speak, but her words were choked by sobs. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I was going to tell you, I swear, but I didn't know how." Michael's laugh was cold, bitter. "You didn't know how? Or you didn't want to lose the life you've been pretending was real?" He stood abruptly, pacing the room as he ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You let me fall in love with him, Sarah. You let me dream of a future that was a lie." The baby stirred in Sarah's arms, his soft cries cutting through the tension. Michael's gaze softened momentarily as he looked at the child, his heart aching despite everything. "He's still your son in every way that matters, Michael," Sarah pleaded. "You've loved him since the day he was born. That doesn't change." Michael stopped, his eyes locking onto hers. "It changes everything," he said quietly. "Trust is the foundation of a marriage, and you shattered it. How can I ever believe anything you say again?" Sarah sobbed, clutching the baby tighter, her desperation palpable. "We can fix this," she begged. "Please, Michael. Don't throw everything away." But Michael's mind was made up. The betrayal was too deep, the pain too raw. "I'm filing the papers," he said, his voice resolute. "I'll make sure he's taken care of. But I can't stay in this marriage, Sarah. Not after this." The baby's cries grew louder as Michael grabbed his coat, his movements mechanical, as if on autopilot. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her sobs echoing in the room. Michael hesitated at the door, his hand on the knob. For a brief moment, he turned back, his eyes meeting hers. "Merry Christmas," he said, his voice heavy with finality, before stepping out into the cold winter air. The snow crunched under his feet as he walked away, the warm glow of the house behind him fading into the distance. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't stay. Some betrayals, he realized, are too deep to forgive. And as the snow continued to fall, covering the world in a blanket of white, Michael felt the first sting of freedom, and the bittersweet ache of letting go. The biting chill of the winter air hit Michael's face as he stepped outside, the sound of the door closing behind him ringing in his ears like a final punctuation mark on their life together. Snow fell softly, blanketing the neighborhood in a pristine white that seemed almost mocking. How could everything look so pure and untouched when his world had just collapsed? His breath clouded in front of him as he stood on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. For a moment, he considered walking back inside, but the weight in his chest reminded him that there was nothing left to say. Michael started walking, each step crunching the snow beneath his boots. His mind raced, replaying every moment of the past few weeks, every clue he had ignored, every sign he had brushed aside. He thought of the way Sarah had smiled at him when she handed him the baby for the first time, the way she had reassured him during sleepless nights, the way she had whispered, "I love you," as they fell asleep. It had all felt so real, so genuine. Was it all an act? Or had there been moments where she'd truly loved him, despite the lies? He found himself at the edge of a small park, the swing swaying gently in the wind. The sight of the empty playground brought an ache to his chest. He had dreamed of bringing their son here, pushing him on the swings, teaching him how to ride a bike, building snowmen in the winter. Those dreams now felt like shards of glass, cutting into him with every thought. He sat down on a bench, burying his face in his hands, his breath hitching as he fought back tears. He wasn't the type to cry, but the pain was unbearable. Back at the house, Sarah sat frozen on the couch, the baby now asleep in her arms. Her tears had dried, leaving streaks on her face, but the hollow ache in her chest remained. She stared at the divorce papers, her mind spinning with fear and regret. She had always known this day might come, but she had convinced herself she could delay it, that she could somehow hold on to the life she had built with Michael. But now, it was all unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She thought back to the moment she had discovered she was pregnant. It had been a whirlwind of emotions, joy, fear, and an overwhelming sense of guilt. She had known the truth even then, but she had buried it deep, convincing herself that it didn't matter. Michael loved her, and he would love the baby too. And for a while, it had worked. They had been happy, or at least she thought they had been. But the guilt had always lingered, a shadow that grew darker with each passing day. Sarah picked up her phone, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. She stopped on a name, one she hadn't seen in months but had never forgotten. Her heart pounded as she hesitated, her finger hovering over the call button. She knew she couldn't undo what had happened, but maybe she could find some way to make things right. She pressed the button, the ringing in her ear feeling like a countdown to something inevitable. Meanwhile, Michael sat on the bench, his phone buzzing in his pocket. He ignored it at first, but the persistent vibration forced him to pull it out. It was his best friend, Alex. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail, but he knew he couldn't sit in silence any longer. He answered, his voice hoarse. "Hey," he said, trying to sound composed. "Michael, what's going on?" Alex's voice was filled with concern. "Sarah called me. She said you're filing for divorce." "What happened?" Michael let out a bitter laugh. "She didn't tell you?" he asked, his voice laced with anger. "The baby isn't mine, Alex. I did a DNA test. She's been lying to me this whole time." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Alex spoke again, his tone careful. "I'm so sorry, man. I don't even know what to say. Are you okay? Do I sound okay?" Michael snapped, his emotions boiling over. "I feel like my entire life has been a lie. How do you come back from that?" "You don't have to go through this alone," Alex said softly. "Come over. We can talk about it." Michael hesitated. The idea of being around someone who cared, someone who could help him process everything, was tempting. But at the same time, he felt like he needed to be alone, to figure out what his next steps would be. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Thanks, Alex." After hanging up, Michael leaned back on the bench, staring up at the sky. The snow continued to fall, landing softly on his face, as if the world was trying to offer some semblance of comfort. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: the life he had known was over. As the hours passed, Sarah sat in the house, staring at the clock. Every minute felt like an eternity as she waited for Michael to return, hoping against hope that he would. She had rehearsed what she would say, how she would try to explain, but deep down, she knew words might not be enough. When the front door finally opened, her heart leaped in her chest. Michael stepped inside, his face cold and expressionless. He didn't say a word as he hung up his coat and walked into the living room. The sight of Sarah holding the baby, her eyes red and swollen from crying, stirred something in him: anger, sadness, love, all tangled together in a knot he couldn't untangle. "Michael," Sarah began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I know I hurt you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Michael shook his head, his jaw tight. "You can't fix this, Sarah. Some things can't be undone. But we can try," she pleaded. "We can go to therapy, we can talk about everything. Please, don't throw everything away." Michael's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "It's not just about us," he said quietly. "It's about trust. And once that's gone, it's gone." The baby stirred in Sarah's arms, letting out a small cry. Michael looked at him, his heart aching with love and pain. "I'll always care for him," he said, his voice breaking. But I can't stay. Not after this. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving Sarah sitting alone, her sobs filling the empty room. The weight of the silence was crushing, a reminder of the life they had lost and the future they would never have.